Welcome to the Health Feeds Performance podcast, where we believe that whole body nourishment is a requisite for athletic success. I'm your host, Ian Craig, from the Centre for Integrative Sports Nutrition, and I'm talking to somatic therapist Patricia Warby this evening. The topic we're going to be discussing is anxiety in sport, which seems to be a rising theme with quite a lot of high-profile athletes complaining now of mental health issues. So from my point of view, anxiety in sport extends beyond the nervousness that an athlete might, expect to experience when they compete, like I did when I was a middle distance athlete. But there's more going on. What else is happening in the world of an athlete that practitioners should know about and could make some differences with? So, Patricia, thanks so much for joining me. We've interacted a lot over the years. You actually just did a tutorial for me earlier talking about mitochondria and psychological connection with that. So we always get into these amazing discussions. And this evening we're going to talk about anxiety, but we're also just going to let it free flow and see what interesting stuff comes out. So to get started, can you tell our audience who you are, what you do, and what's the incredible way that you work as well?
Okay. Well, hi everyone. I'm Patricia Warby. My full title, Dr. Patricia Warby, but not medically. I'm a PhD. My PhD is in the somatic components of chronic pain. And I became interested in this a while ago because I started to get lots of chronic pain patients, and I wanted to know more about what the sort of drivers of that situation are. But I also noticed that anxiety is a very big commonality amongst all the people I see. So I've been approaching it now for the last 10, 11 years, I think it is, from a somatic perspective, from a mind-body connection perspective, rather than just anxiety as a disease and it needs medicating. I definitely treat it as a symptom of a problem with the life that is being lived in some way. Something emotional is not being met in that life. And that's kind of what I investigate. I look back at their past experience, particularly childhood experience, and then I help people to resolve it through the body. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. But of course, trying to explain something that is primarily somatic and experiential in words is very, very, very difficult. So I'm sure you're going to ask me more.
Tell us more about somatic, right? So somatic, something to do with the body. And I've got an interesting question around anxiety, because anxiety people will generally think of as a mind thing. Mm-hmm. But I personally will say I'm not generally anxious in the mind, but I'll sometimes feel anxious in the body. Mm-hmm. So can you just extend that sort of observation of somatic, the mind-body connection? So
my original training, funnily enough, was in massage therapy. So that's really where I began. And I found people stored so much information in the body, so much memory was stored there. And so just to treat anxiety as a mind issue is missing the point hugely. It's actually treating it as if the body operates from only one area, that nothing talks to anything else, which of course is complete nonsense. There is a feedback loop from your body to your back brain, which records both your emotional state and also the state of safety that you perceive in your environment. It's a sort of survival brain. And usually what we see, of course, there is acute anxiety, which is more situational. You've got a big meet or a big run and something's coming up for you that feels really significant and you're nervous. that's kind of normal anxiety. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this chronic, low-level feeling that persists in the body and actually feeds bottom-up information into the limbic structures of your brain and causes you to feel, out of place in some way. Nothing works properly. Your digestion goes, your immunity is impaired. Sometimes you struggle in relationships. You feel things very deeply. You get very hurt. Maybe you overcompensate with A-type behaviors because there's a part of you that doesn't believe you're worthy. There's all sorts of things that come in, and it really is present in the body. And therefore, what I ask people to do is to locate the sensation or the feeling when we engage with the problem that they're facing. Because what I have found is that talk therapy is very limited in this respect and will really only allow you to kind of navigate around the issue. It never really gets to the root cause, whereas somatics can't lie. The body cannot lie, okay? It will reveal to you exactly what's going on, whether you like it or not. It's going to tell you the truth. And so to uncover that is my specialty, really. It might sound a little bit cruel, but actually it's a very gentle process. And it helps to release this burden of unmet emotional needs that's present in the body, causing symptoms. And most people have some form of chronic anxiety, even if it's not overt and they're not aware of it. It's just something that happens to a lot of people when they come through childhood and some emotional needs are not being met in some way.
What kind of clients do you work with?
Well, my specialist area is in chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and chronic anxiety. And those three often have overlaps, you don't get someone who just has one and not the other. Sometimes you have all three. But my focus has been on people who get stuck in situations, repeating patterns or repeating symptoms that they simply can't get out of. Because that's where modern medicine really fails. Chronic medicine, as it's currently practiced, is all about symptom suppression and symptom management and doesn't really address the root cause, which is likely biopsychosocial. So my clients tend to be people who've had a diagnosis, sometimes of chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. Sometimes it's just you've got some sort of OCD symptom, bipolar, whatever. The labels go on and on. In fact, they get longer every year, as you've probably noticed. And you can kind of see the burgeoning labelism that doesn't tell that person anything about what causes this problem or how to get out of it. So, I'm their last stop usually when they've done the conventional route and got nowhere, or sometimes been made worse by all the medications.
Yeah, I'll second that. I work a lot with autoimmunity, and I can't remember the number of occasions I've worked with somebody with a condition that I've never heard of before, because it's a new thing that just keeps getting added. But if you get back to the root causes, it doesn't really matter what the expression is. It's the way it's manifesting for that individual. So what I was hearing there is more chronic cases. In sport, we're obviously talking about athletes today. Further down the line, I can testify that athletes will often get into that place if they've pushed too long and too far. But I have sent you a couple of athletes in the last year or two and asked you to present on the topic and that sort of stuff. So I want you to just kind of give us a perspective from a person looking outside into the sporting environment. What have you learned over, that period of time looking in?
Yeah, it's a good question because sport was never my forte. Okay, so I'm not particularly adept sporting wise, but what I notice with the people I'm working with is that they all have this highly focused attitude. Almost, it's so narrow that it's an adaptation, as far as I can see, to something that feels painful. It's almost like you've got to succeed for a reason. There's an underlying driver that I've noticed, and it varies with each person, but there is this super high achieving, A-type driven personality style in most of the people that I've worked with from you. And, I greatly admire the focus and the dedication required for people to succeed at any level, particularly the elite level. And the only sort of comparison I can have is having been in academia, that kind of focus and drive, which often is a bit cutthroat as well, is sort of reminiscent for me of the kind of academic world that I come from. But these people are such dedicated individuals, and I love that about them. But often what happens is their past comes up to bite them. And yes, it's true, they haven't got usually into the chronic stage yet, but there are issues that come up that simply don't go away. Maybe they have an injury that doesn't heal, or travels around the body. That's another one, you start with a neck injury and it starts to go down the arm and into the hands, and what's all that about? Or they get one issue in the knee or something, and then suddenly it's all over the body. Pain is a really interesting, it's a resonance, okay? It's not just a physical thing. The mind body is in pain, and physical pain is the mind body's expression of unmet issues that you are not looking at. And sports people in particular, because of this really narrow focus, are often completely unaware that they have anything that could be driving these syndromes of, poor repair or, developing syndrome in pain, So we have to draw their attention to what's underneath the presenting symptom, and that's kind of what I do.
So I'll put my hand up and say, yes, I was one of them. I'll just tell you a story or two before we go on. I was a middle distance athlete, so you'd run on your toes. I had a career plagued with Achilles tendonitis and calf problems. But there were many occasions where I'd get some small injury or a tweak, not even an injury. And I'd be getting massage, physio, I'd be doing all the rehab exercises. The race I was trying to taper for was coming closer and closer, and missed the race. What happens? Next day, I go out and run and the pain's gone. That was interesting. So that was my experience. I had several kind of things like that happening to me in my career. Like I remember training in Australia and my mileage was starting to creep up, and I had in my mind, when I get to 70 miles a week, that's when injuries come. And guess what? 1 week later, I was injured. So yeah, absolutely. And injuries move around. That's quite a key one to pick up on in clients, as opposed to a deep physical wound type injury that's in one place. So this is a big question, but we can start. What do we do about it? What do you do about it if you see these kind of patterns? Where do you go with the athlete?
So if the symptoms are moving or changing in some way that can't be explained by tissue damage, okay, because tissue damage doesn't move around, all right? This, we know, therefore, is created in the pain centers in the brain and the autonomic nervous system, which is linking to your body, because the autonomics control not only everything that's kind of functional in your body that you don't control, all the automatic functions, but it also controls your emotional regulation, okay? And so what I'll be looking to do is first get somebody to focus on the problem, but not from the perspective of what's wrong and how do I need to fix this, which is an A-type driven, I just need to get back into, I just need to get back to training or whatever. It's like, let's look at what the body is communicating here about the underlying missing emotional need. Something has not been met here. And so how I approach that is, I'll establish relational safety, and that's really important, okay? A lot of highly driven athletes are driven for a reason, they're compensating for something in their early history which did not feel connected, did not feel safe, did not feel reliable, like the attachment perhaps was not reliable. Something was missing, and I am there to be the proxy attachment figure. I never describe it this way, only not to the client. But I am there to be a witness, non-judgmental, calm, grounded in my experience of being present with them while we look at what the body is trying to communicate. And that initially can sound very, very strange. And a lot of people I've worked with who were, particularly, the male A-type, never really looked at their body until it goes wrong. Then they're really focused. Why am I in pain? But up until that point, there hasn't been much engagement. You see the body as the vehicle for success, the vehicle for achievement. And that's why you push it so hard, because you need to satisfy that unmet emotional need of mattering, of having significance. So it is about kind of being the quiet, calm connection that they never had, and allowing the body to be heard and witnessed and experiencing something beyond the average conception of what pain means and what is really going on inside them. So we do get a bit experimental with this, but I like to start with something called havening, because that's a very grounding technique that everyone can learn, and they can do it at home. And it's something that helps neurologically regulate initially and allow a nervous system to connect properly one-on-one with someone. And that may be a difficult thing for some people if they didn't have this reliable connection before. So I'm kind of training the nervous system to respond in new ways, which are not the strategy that was adopted in childhood, but is a new responsiveness to feeling safe. I don't know if that explains it, but that's what I do.
So you're talking a lot about childhood, and I'll go into a question that I've just picked up in the chat box by Scott. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. He's asking if PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, would have a similar manifestation for maybe disabled athletes after their accident, or cyclists coming back from a big crash, for example. Does that trauma of the event stay in the unconscious and kind of roll out as anxiety and have a lasting effect?
Absolutely. And the body doesn't have labels. The body doesn't have the PTSD label separate from trauma, or what it's manifesting is feeling lacking support for something that's been so overwhelming that the coping strategy of the nervous system, that adaptation range, has been overstepped. And the nervous system can no longer adapt in the sense of it can heal and respond and bounce back. So PTSD is just a label we give to extreme symptomology from, usually, it has to be said, shock trauma. Okay, so yes, you have an accident. a one-off event happens that completely overwhelms you, causes some sort of physical or mental, emotional wounding. But most trauma is not of that kind. By far the majority is slow, daily, relational wounding from misattuned, it has to be said, family structures. All right, and usually there's some attachment wound, usually with one or both parents. Sometimes it can be bullying in the family, or you just not given the space and the support that you need. But it will absolutely present its bill later on in your life when the next time you experience something that reminds the mind-body of those early, slow, but consistent relational wounds. And we don't have a label for that. The closest we have is, we call it complex PTSD, because we don't know what else to call it, but what it means is it's based on relationships rather than a one-off event. It's based on this mismatch between the emotional needs of the child and what is given. And that is particularly heightened if the child is highly sensitive. I'll come on to that at some point, but it's a very common experience in most people's lives. What makes the difference between somebody who expresses that and someone who doesn't is how much support they got in childhood. Emotional support. Someone who was consistently there for them no matter what. And that's very hard to do. And I'm not down on parents, because it's a very hard job. And particularly if you had a rubbish childhood as well, and you're trying to learn how to do this thing, and you don't really know because you never had it and you never felt it in your own body. So how do you give it to someone else? So it's complex, but the patterns are very, very similar. And what you're trying to do is trace back what are the beliefs and behaviors of this person that are contributing to the physical manifestation in that mind body. So my approach is very much not to treat the label or the diagnosis, which, by the way, if you look at the derivation of the word diagnosis, it's very interesting. Dia to gnosis, knowing. All right, it's comparison between one thing and another in order to derive some understanding of what the patient is or person is suffering. And we used to think the diagnosis would be like the endpoint that would give us the cure. But these days, a diagnosis, anxiety, you have bipolar disorder, you have ADHD, is only descriptive. That's what it's doing, is just ticking a certain set of symptoms in the DSM, which is the Psychiatrist's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And it's saying, oh, here's the constellation of symptoms, and this is therefore presenting as this label. But then you go to a different consultant and they will see a different set of overlapping symptoms and they will call it something else. So many of the people I see have diagnoses, a long, long line of different diagnoses at different times in their life. And my approach is to look at the person in front of me who is presenting rather than the label that needs a cure or a fix.
And exactly the same in physiological medicine. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Well, yeah, pardon the pun, but no shit. It's just a description. Let's look at the person. Let's look at who's behind the irritability in that bowel, I should say. Let's go into a couple of examples. I think that would be quite useful from what you've talked about in the childhood. I'll just throw out a personal example again. I was a sensitive kid. As you said, we can go onto that in a minute. I was bullied around about age 8 or 9, something around that. I started running age 10 and I was a natural and just went straight into it, started winning straight away. And the confidence picked up, and then the bullying stopped. It's like, okay, right. So there's some psychological attachment at that stage, roughly age 10, that contributed to a 20-year career of, chasing an Olympic medal, which I never got to, but I had a good try. How about adding another example in, Patricia? We talked about somebody that we both worked on with earlier today. So do you want to just share a couple of things about him that would consolidate what you've just been talking about?
Yeah. Was a rower for Oxford University, but he was also a very dedicated student. He was achieving top grades and everything, very, very focused. But his dream was to row for Oxford. And he was told quite early on that he would definitely make the team, and he trained really hard. But then something happened that was quite political, and he was dropped from the team. And he was given a reason that was actually false, and he knew it was false because he was highly sensitive as a kid and highly sensitive now. And he recognized the dissonance between what he was being told and he didn't know what the real reason was. He just knew it wasn't what he was being told. And it completely shattered his worldview and his trust and faith in the coach, and who had guaranteed him a place, and his world kind of fell apart. And not only could he, he couldn't make sense of his world, but his physical body started to react in ways that were so odd. The pain was just excruciating. He couldn't walk at one point. Knee pain was so disabling that he wasn't able to even get out of bed and walk, down the street. So my priority with this young man was to look at his childhood history, because nobody had asked him that, and it hadn't ever been looked at. It was just seen as an injury for some reason, for some unknown reason. And I was like, no injury is for an unknown reason. There is a tension in the system, like fascially, that is creating the predisposition for whatever pain he's experiencing. And we do know that knees, particularly from a holistic viewpoint, usually have a meaning. What's coming, what's next. It's the focus on the future that has been distorted and changed somehow. And when I went back to his childhood, what I noticed was he'd always been the child that everybody thought, well, he's okay. We don't need to pay much attention to him because, he had a sibling who was much more needy. And so he didn't get the support he needed in terms of even someone turning up to sports day for him, or, he was just left to get on with things. And so his coping strategy was very much, I can do it. I'm fine. I'll just get on and prove to you how much I can achieve. And that's what he was doing. But then when the betrayal happened, because when somebody lies to you, that's a betrayal of trust, okay? There may be very good reasons why they lie to you. But when they do, and you perceive that, it distorts your mind-body's view of who can be safe and who, what's safe in the world and what's not. And so we found that he felt hyper-responsible for maintaining this view of himself as invulnerable, as high-achieving, very, very dedicated. And when he didn't get the very thing that had been the crowning glory for him, the pinnacle achievement, he felt like his whole meaning and purpose had been completely crushed. And he didn't have any faith in the future. And lack of faith in the future is going to play out as chronic injury. So how we solved it, I would love to say I had a protocol that I just followed and, that worked. But it was very much exploring with him what he was afraid of, actually what he was afraid of. And what he was afraid of was failure, with this hyper responsibility resting on his shoulders. And so we helped him to explore that unconsciously, i.e. not just talking about it, because he didn't really understand what I meant consciously. He was like, well, you know, I'll get there. It was like, no, it's not about that. It's about the child within who is saying, please listen to me. Please pay me attention. Please love me. Because that is what your emotional brain is asking. Am I loved? And your back brain is saying, am I safe? And those two things are completely unconscious, and most people are not even aware that they're expressing those needs, because we're so focused on thinking, you know, what do I need to learn? What do I need to do? How do I need to fix this? So it's going back to the roots, really, and looking at what makes that person sitting in front of you. What is their belief structure? How do they feel about themselves? How much embedded shame do they have? Because everyone has some. Shame is not about failing in deed. It's about not being good enough in being. It's who you are, not what you did, is not enough. Somehow. It's a learnt experience from this misattunement between your emotional needs and what you received. And he had loads of that as well. So it was a case of kind of helping him to uncover that and then witness it and then release it. And it worked. Fantastic.
And he ran London Marathon last week after, last September, hardly been able to take a step. So yeah, it was incredible. It's almost like a butterfly just opening up from a chrysalis.
Yes, indeed. It's a good analogy.
Yes.
Because it's reworking. You know what happens in the chrysalis is you get all the materials and you create the soup, and then you create something new out of it, all right? It's not that I dissolve people, because I don't, you know. I sit with them and they maintain their wholeness. But we explore the maelstrom of emotional kind of messiness that's underneath the coping strategy in order to kind of reconstitute a grounded view of yourself that's built on the foundation of I am enough and I am safe in this life and safe in my body, which may have been missing in childhood. And that is taught really through using sensory input in connection with a safe other, which is what I provide. I'm heart to heart. I'm heart connecting with that person, and they are not judged and they are welcomed. And the nervous system is interpersonal, so it absolutely responds to that. You're responding to that right now as you're listening, all right? Because I can see it in your face. There are little things that are happening that you're assenting to. I can see your brain is taking in information. And so really what we're doing is we're rewiring from a grounded baseline of who I am is worthy, which is a whole nother ball game. Sorry about the pun, but it's a wholly different experience of self than the one that says, I'm okay, I'm doing really well, but don't look down, don't look down, don't look down, don't go inside, don't feel anything. Just kind of cope, just manage it, you'll be fine.
Let's talk about sensitivity, because you brought it up earlier. And when we were discussing with the students earlier, one of the guys on the course works with academy footballers, and you said, well, look out for the quiet ones that seem okay, but there's a lot going on under the bonnet. Mm-hmm. What is sensitivity? What's a highly sensitive person? What's the implications in anxiety? What are the pros and cons in a sporting environment that they'll need to experience and navigate?
Okay, so what we have discovered in the last 10 or so years is that sensitivity in human populations does not follow a standard deviation, the bell curve. Instead, it is grouped into 2 or 3, some people say it's 3 distinct groups. there is a subset of people, it's about 20% of the population, who are born, in other words, it's a trait, not a condition, who are born with much higher reactivity inside their nervous system to stimulus of all kinds, good or bad. And it's more to do with how it's processed within the brain. And so sensory processing sensitivity is now the new term, SBS, for high sensitivity, because it describes it better, and it also takes away that stigma of, ooh, I'm highly sensitive, don't touch me. It's not about that. It's actually about children who process differently. And I do believe it's more of a neurodiversity, actually, although we could say some neurodiversities are more developmental. This is definitely something that's present in the womb. It's been demonstrated that some children are just more reactive. Now, what does that mean for the person growing up is that their needs are greater. They need a stable environmental baseline. They need somebody who's present for them unconditionally in order for their brains to fully grow and integrate. Neurodevelopment is predicated on the quality of the environment that person perceives. But it's doubly so for highly sensitive individuals. And often highly sensitive individuals are not the ones who will shout out and be loud and, look at me, look at me. They're the ones that will need to go inside in order to deal with whatever's happening. And so they tend to be more quiet, more introspective, more thoughtful. They'll feel things really deeply. They're very empathic. They're often very popular because they know how to deal with other people's emotions. In fact, they often take them on themselves. Their boundaries are very porous, and they tend to absorb the emotion of whatever's going on around them. But that can have a chronic toll over time, because these boundaries, being very poorly established, can easily lead to overwhelm in that child and later on in that adult. And so we have to look at sensitivity as being something that needs recognition, and it needs extra special care to be unconditionally present for that person, no matter what, and to kind of attune to them in ways that don't have to be asked for. And every person I've ever worked with, who most of my clients are highly sensitive, has someone in their life that was like that for them. Sometimes it's a grandparent, sometimes it's an aunt or an uncle, sometimes it's a friend or even the family dog. I can't tell you how many times I've read that on a form, was there someone you could confide in unconditionally? And they'll say, my dog. And that's all they had. That's very sad. But it's often the case that they had nobody in their family who really got them or understood them, but they could always be present with an animal of some kind.
And that person obviously should be parents and grandparents and teachers when they're young. But as they're growing up into a sporting environment,
Coaches,
some sensitive people will have, be highly driven as well. And then the coaches can step in, in some cases.
And they need to be really aware of what the characteristics of high sensitivity are. When somebody who's highly sensitive is criticised or their performance is called into question, you're smiling wryly there, all right, it sets off like an alarm in the body. It's not something that just they can deal with and it just goes over their head. Like ordinarily sensitive people would just be like, yeah, so what? You critique a person who is highly sensitive, they are forced into this kind of state of high arousal of something's wrong and I need to fix it. And then they go into rumination. rumination is what I call the rabbit hole, just over and over, going over the scenario. I should have said this, I should have done that. What if they had said that or done this? And that drives, of course, this huge burden of anxiety, because anxiety is just a scream from your mind body that something is not well. And so we have certain characteristics that we need to be mindful of. I think everybody should understand high sensitivity, that it sometimes masks as other things, there's a lot of crossover in different neurodevelopmental issues, but just to recognize that someone needs a calm, centered person who's present for them and is unconditionally supportive. And as we know from stories in the news recently, that's not always the case in sport. Coaches are often themselves quite traumatized, often quite driven, sometimes, let's be honest, abusive. There's been a lot of cases recently where, coaches have been found to be highly abusive of their charges and their students. So it's a deeply hidden problem that children are sometimes completely unsupported. And when that happens, it's catastrophic for the adult that they will become, not just in the sporting realm, but in their personal relationships, in their ability to function well, because their brains have not fully integrated. They are stuck in a childlike reactivity that says, I'm wrong. There's something about me that's wrong, and I don't know how to deal with that.
So, Patricia, why is it we seem to be getting more reports nowadays with athletes with anxiety and mental health issues? There was one very prominent one with the US gymnast during the delayed Tokyo Olympics. And then that seems to have been a watershed where lots more athletes have said, yeah, I've had anxiety, I've had mental health issues. I don't remember it in my time, like in the 90s. What's changing? Is it societal changes? Is it at all levels? Or is it associated with the sports itself? Maybe there's not an answer to that question, but, have you got any thoughts on the topic?
I think you have to look at the environment that we operate in now, and both on an individual kind of familial level, but also on a societal level. We have a system that encourages children to compete with each other, academically, as well as in sporting arena. We have social media that bombards us 24/7 with a false kind of sense of connection, what Esther Perel calls artificial intimacy, or AI, which I think is rather a beautiful term, all right? I've got 200 likes, but nobody I can call when I'm feeling down. I've got loads of friends, but they're not real. They're just people who are competing with me to have the perfect life online. So we have the social media onslaught. We have schooling system, which is all about grades and all about, for the school, not just for the individual, we've got to achieve this level or we lose our funding. And so we're not looking at a holistic care of individual children. We've got the pressure to achieve is huge. And the communities that perhaps you remember and I remember, my school friends were very supportive. My neighborhood was supportive. I think we lack that now. And we have a lot of children who've been completely disconnected from their communities by COVID, of course, and the lockdowns, and now everything's online, and even teaching is online, and schools are struggling to bring in pastoral care, to bring in, one-on-one connections with children, and they're often punished for acting out their distress. Quite apart from the the intergenerational trauma is, of course, cumulative. So if you're a traumatized child who grows up to have a child, then you're likely to not know how to connect with them well, and you create that pattern goes down the generations. So the answer to that is it's not one thing. But you know, I've got this book, which I recommend. The Myth of Normal, Gabor Mate. I'm halfway through it. It's an extraordinary book. And he is talking about precisely this thing, that this epigenetic understanding that your genes are molded by your environment extends not just to the individual experience of growing up, but to the society at large. And I think we're just seeing so much more pressure on individuals and less support. And that is catastrophic. As I said, that's going to send you into this fight and flight, sympathetic activation, almost on a constant basis. You're bathed in cortisol, which just destroys your body over time. So I think we have to understand that we all have a responsibility to change this by really emphasizing the value of interpersonal connection and building community, but real community rather than the false one.
Which sports clubs should be able to do. But if you've got over-demanding coaches and high competitive standards between athletes, then it can be breeding the wrong thing.
The emphasis can be on the competition rather than on the development of that person's innate skill set, you know, and really harnessing that, which is what it should, it's what schooling should do, it's what training should do, is to harness that individual person's brightness, their light, how they express themselves, whether on the track or field or in personal life. It's about building the highest potential for that individual.
I'll throw in a lovely reframe from my friend Paul Carlos, which we'll see him in another podcast. I was talking to him about my athletic days at one point, and I must have said competed against, and he just grabbed me and said, not competed against or not competing against, competing with. And that's a lovely reframe that the bottom line is all these people doing the same kind of sport as you are similar minded. They can be your friends. And you see that with international athletes. I give an example, a colleague, Henrietta Paxton, who's a nutritional therapist. She was an international pole vaulter. And you'd see on the TV, these pole vaulters would arrive at different meets all around the world, and they became friends after a while. They had a community. And you see that in different sports as well. And while we're talking about Henrietta, you were discussing like body trauma earlier and not being connected between the mind and the body. And she got into a chronic injury at one point that the sports doc said, your career's finished. And she said, well, so that. And she started realizing how punishing she'd been with her mind to her body, and how could her body keep up with all these demands. And she started reframing that experience to, thank you, body, for supporting me through all these hard endeavors that I'm trying to do. You're amazing. You're with me every day, and you're still standing strong. So, and that got her out of the injury rut and got her back into an international competition. So it's a similar kind of example like the ones I was giving earlier. You know, in a negative mind space, you get into this injury mode. You need to flip into a positive state to be able to get out of it.
So one of the things I do with people, bear in mind a lot of the people come to me when they've tried everything and they've not got anywhere, is bring them into a new relationship with their bodies, where gratitude, exactly what you just said, is the primary feeling, rather than it's punishing me and I hate it. You know, they've lost connection with the message that the body is trying to give, and they've identified with this idea that the body is punishing them in some way by failing. Getting into the idea of gratitude is profoundly healing. And so often I say with people, thank you, body. We do actually say that. We start to talk to the body as if it was a thing, as if it was another person. And the body's response to that is, well, thank God, because I've been screaming at you for years. And, and now it's time you listened. So I think that's what I mean by mindset, is coming into a new relationship with this deeply connected system. This is not a bundle of organs that operate independently. This is a system, and it's a resonant system. It's a heart-connected system, heart-led system. And so your emotions around yourself and other people really impact you on a physiological level. And so, yeah, gratitude, hope. Hope is one of the most profoundly healing emotions I've found. I just say to people, you're going to get well, or, you're going to recover. I know it because I have proof. I have worked with a number of people now, hundreds of people, and the change in the system which they have been functioning from, which is my life is over, or I can't ever see anything getting better. Despair is such a low resonant frequency that on a cellular level, everything is in stasis. It's in protection. And so we have to open that up to a new resonance of hope, love, gratitude, finally into empowerment, true empowerment, which isn't about pushing yourself into high achieving competitive states. It's about, I deserve to be here, and I'm going to express what's wonderful about me without any hint of big-headedness or pride. This is about a journey to wholeness, which says, I am here, I deserve to be here.
Which will release more energy available to the body in the process. So I think
Absolutely.
a lot of especially athletes will be fearful that if you start actually talking to them a bit fluffy like this, they're relinquishing control, but actually they're relinquishing the negative states or the very harsh states that they've been living in. And this is, I've worked with same but different types of clients in Johannesburg, just very, very highly driven, but they just drive themselves down to the point they're on their knees physiologically, and then they come knocking on your door. So yeah, then you have to open them up. If they can learn to open themselves up, their energy is more available to do the events that they want to do. Now, we're getting close to the end now. I want to just talk to you about heart-mind. And that's a kind of more energetic, spiritual kind of term. Heart and mind are organ systems in a physiological term, but you think a bit differently. So just explain what the heart-mind resonance would be, and you've started to talk about it. Just expand a wee bit as to how do you get there? How do you get to that heart-led existence that can free up some emotional energy?
Well, the first thing is to recognize the importance of feeling your emotions, all right? Not suppressing them. Allowing all the emotions. We're not just talking the good ones. We're not just talking, fluffy emotions. We're talking rage and guilt and shame. And it's the heart is not just a physiological pump. It actually has an electromagnetic field which goes out for a long way outside the human body, 10, 12 feet. It's measurable. It's toroidal. You can map it. And it's very responsible for entraining the brain, so creating states of being which are harmonious, and also connecting with other people and other living things. And so this understanding I would have obviously laughed at before, because I'm a scientist. I've trained as a biochemist and physiologist, and nobody taught me anything about this. This was just the heart was a pump and the brain was the CEO of the body, and it just followed all the instructions, whatever the brain told it, it sped it up or slowed it down. The heart is so much more than that. It has this ability to feel things way before the brain does. Okay, it perceives things in the environment. It has sensory neurites that make it actually a sensory organ of great sensitivity. And the Heart Math Institute have done experiments, and they've been corroborated elsewhere, where people are shown rapidly produce pictures on screen that are either distressing or lovely. And the heart is able to predict which picture will come up before the brain perceives it, all right? Because something about that the heart can detect. And so if you think of the heart being as the main sort of resonant organ of the body that is able to direct information flow to states of mental activity, that is closer to the reality than we've got this top-down brain which controls everything. And how to enhance it? Well, getting into feeling states, acknowledging your pain, acknowledging your joy, acknowledging who you are, allowing other people to help you and connect with you, because a lot of people shut that down for various reasons. Reaching out for help is a really big thing for a lot of people. And just noticing who's safe for you and who isn't, and reaching out to the people that actually feel good to you. So we're back to community, but the heart is just a very key. Heart-based connection is impossible to describe on a material level, because it doesn't have an image. There's no direct connection. There's no rope that links you and me, or me and anybody I'm working with, but they feel it inside when I'm present for them. And if I just give you an example, like if I turn away, or I look really bored or angry, or whatever it is, your heart feels that. All right, you're like, oh, this woman doesn't like me very much, or God, I'm obviously a problem because she's not interested, So I make a point of leaning towards people, and they know, their bodies notice that. Lean towards them, a good manner, a good voice prosody, and it's not something I think, it's just natural to me, because I want to know these people and I want to know who they really are, and I believe in them, and that is what engenders the connection. So anyway, it's hard to explain in words, but there you are.
That's amazing, thank you. And you do express it in more than words, as you said, with your body language. Patricia, how do people find you? Website, social media. Please also mention one or two of your books and your course that you run as well. Okay. You can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk. That's my therapy site. That's if you want to come and work with me or join one of my group programs. I'm also on patriciawarby.com, which is my kind of author education site, anything to do with my books. And I've written 7, I think it is now. I've got an 8th on the go. Not very productive at the moment, but I will get there. I've written one specifically on chronic conditions and stress and trauma, and that's called The Scar That Won't Heal. That's one I wrote in 2015, but I've also updated it after COVID, because COVID was such a massive societal trauma that I felt it deserved extra information. So I rewrote it then. I've also got books on the importance of the microbiome, cellular aging and health, the electromagnetic nature of the human experience, even down to the DNA, which is, God, that's another topic we could go into. DNA is a resonant molecule that stores information, and a few esoteric ones as well, like things about dementia and the beauty of natural harmony in mathematics and so on. So anything that interests me. You can find my courses
on my website, or I do a couple for the chrysalis effect, which is a specialist recovery program for people with chronic fatigue and chronic pain. So, you know, I'm all over YouTube. I've got my YouTube channel, which I do a regular weekly presentation. You just type in Patricia Warby, you'll find me. And that's about it, really. That's probably the best way of communicating with me.
Thanks, Patricia. We could quite easily go for another hour or so. So
I think we could, yeah.
We'll have to.
We'll have to do another.
I'd like to express my gratitude towards Patricia and all my other guests on the Health Feeds Performance podcasts. To see or to listen to some of my other interviews, subscribe to our YouTube channel or come onto the other podcast main channels. Also, I want to hear what you would like to learn in sports nutrition. So please share your ideas. Come onto our website, www.intsportsnutrition.com. And while you're there, have a wee look at the array of courses that we run. So, bye for now.